The Asus ROG Strix SCAR 17 SE laptop has a huge list of features, starting with an Intel Core i9-12950HX processor, which can do this. 4 GHz on all cores, 10 minutes into the run, 21,300 in Cinebench R23. From a laptop, the graphics are Nvidia RTX 3080 Ti laptop, and they can run past 150 watts. Not bad, eh? Add in PCI Express M.2 NVMe storage in RAID 0, and you get this. I mean, what? And to wrap up the package, we have a vapor chamber cooler and liquid metal from Thermal Grizzly. Why would they use liquid metal in a laptop?
First of all, it's performance, because nowadays we get to so much more higher power density of the CPUs that a thermal solution really becomes the problem. And the traditional thermal paste is also really a limit. You lose like 5, 6, 7 degrees Celsius compared to the liquid metal. A lot of people are applying liquid metal afterwards when they buy a notebook. Yeah. A lot of people do that, but it's also it's also very tricky. Because you have to prepare the components around it, because if you spill the liquid metal onto the CPU, onto any components, because it's electrically conductive, you can get a short circuit. Therefore, if the notebook is prepared for liquid metal from the factory, it's a lot easier.
And I know what you're thinking. Is that all that the Asus ROG Strix SCAR 17 SE has to offer? To which I can say no. It also glows in the dark. I was actually showing you the pattern on the lid of the laptop glowing under UV light. Asus includes this little UV torch in the box. When you look at it here under regular light, there's nothing to be seen. So that pattern for most people will be invisible all the time, and you'll probably show it off once or twice as a party trick and then forget all about it. I've already given you the model name a couple of times, Asus ROG Strix SCAR 17 SE. The SE denotes the HX processor, so there are other SCAR 17s out there. This is slightly different because of the processor. It's 17.3 inches on the diagonal, just as you'd expect from the model name. It weighs 3 kilos. And the power brick is a 330 watt unit, which weighs just over another kilo. Hefty thing. And obviously if you want to game on the go or any such, you're going to need power. So I think you can basically add that extra weight to your backpack. Ports and connectors. At first glance, there's nothing on the right hand side apart from this exhaust vent. However, we have here this keystone, which is basically a piece of plastic. Little LED there, you'll see. Plug it in. It glows, and now the profiles we have stored on that key are now activated. So were you to have a number of these laptops at your disposal and you're traveling somewhere, you can plug your key into a different laptop, obviously Asus, and lo and behold, your profiles are transferred. I think we can count that as a bit of a gimmick. On the side we have a 3.5mm combo audio jack and a pair of USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A's. So clearly that's for plugging in your mouse, maybe a keyboard, headset. All the other ports and connectors are on the rear. We have the power jack, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, HDMI 2.1, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C, that carries DisplayPort 1.4 and can manage 100 watts power delivery, and next to that Thunderbolt 4 with DisplayPort 1.4. The screen is Quad HD IPS level. We don't like that terminology, much prefer to know which exact technology the screen uses, but IPS level is what we have. 240 Hz refresh rate. There is an option out there somewhere in the world of a full HD screen with 360 Hz refresh. It seems clear to us that those screens are aimed at gamers. After all, who else needs a full HD 360Hz display? But when you consider the processor, which is clearly aimed at mobile workstation users, it gets a little bit confusing. Also, you'll note there's no webcam above the display. A laptop without a webcam seems like a silly move, quite frankly. Every laptop should have a webcam, just as every phone has a camera. The question should be, how good is the webcam? And we want at least a 1080 webcam. and there's 720p stuff. The keyboard is a regular chiclet job, 2mm of travel, feels absolutely fine. No excessive flex. The touchpad is lovely and large. The keyboard may look a little dull, but actually we have per key RGB lighting that is controlled by Aura Sync within Armory Crate. We can click through the various effects. If you choose, you can go for the full rainbow effect, both in the keyboard and the underglow lighting. And when you consider the layering pattern under the UV light in the lid and also the interchangeable corner pieces, you have to consider this isn't intended to be a workstation. I certainly don't object to extras such as RGB lighting, these interchangeable cosmetic pieces, or the UV lamp for the invisible ink pattern on the lid, but I am fairly clear in my mind this is not a workstation. It's a really grunty laptop that's aimed at gamers. Asus Armory Crate controls a number of functions. We've seen the RGB control. The main function to my mind is controlling the power profiles. In silent mode, the CPU will boost to 90 watts and then pull back to 55 watts. Graphics power is restricted to keep the frame rate down to 60 FPS. In performance mode, the CPU boosts to 115 watts and then pulls back to 70 watts sustained. The graphics can run up to 165 watts. The maximum combined power for CPU and GPU, 185 watts. And then in turbo mode, we go for it. The CPU can boost to 160 watts and then pulls back to a sustained 140 watts. Which is huge for a laptop. The graphics can run up to 175 watts on their own, and the maximum combined power for CPU and GPU is 230 watts. And that's the reason that Asus is using a vapor chamber cooler with conductinaut liquid metal. Cooling really matters in this laptop. Removing the bottom cover isn't difficult, it's just a series of screws. However, once the cover is released, it's still attached by a number of ribbon cables. You need to take care if you want to go inside your Asus laptop. Once you're in, you can see the layout's quite conventional. We've got a hefty battery, 2 M.2 slots, DDR5 memory, and the huge cooler covering both the CPU and the GPU, along with those hefty fans. And so we come to the performance charts. With the Strix Scar SE in turbo mode, it stomps the field in Cinebench R23 multi-core. If we strip out the lesser contenders and just leave the more grunty CPUs in the chart, you can see the spread of figures other than that turbo mode are not enormous. 13,000, 15,000, 17,000, quite a lot, but it's the step up to turbo mode and 21,000 that just makes all the difference. And we can flick across to a chart showing the same figures but with the CPU model and the power setting rather than the laptop, so you can see exactly what's going on. The 12950HX at 140 watts is an absolute beast, but it's pretty blooming good at 70 watts. Going to Cinebench R23 single core, once again the Strix Scar SE is up the top of the charts. And as with the multi-core, so with the single core, we strip out the lesser contenders. You can see the spread of figures in single score, not so enormous, 1566 at the bottom, 1925 at the top. And there you can see the models of CPU and the power settings. You won't be surprised to hear it's a similar story in Blender 3.1 Classroom. At the top of the field, the Strix Scar SE in turbo mode is a long way ahead of the next contender. However, all three settings go very well on the Strix Scar SE, even silent mode. Bapco Crossmark, or as I call it, the Intel test. Once again, the Strix Scar SE is up the top of the charts. In 7-zip decompression test, the Strix Scar SE is at the top of the chart in turbo mode, does well in the other two modes, and it's the same story in the compression test. And just look, 3D Mark TimeSpy CPU score. The Strix Scar SE is up the top in all three power modes, including silent mode. Graphics performance in 3D Mark TimeSpy. This is interesting. You can see that silent mode cripples those graphics way down the charts. However, in performance mode and turbo mode, it goes very nicely. Strip out the other contenders and we can see the spread of figures. Under 10,000 in silent mode, 12.5 to 13,000 in performance and turbo mode. And here you can see the graphics chips and the power settings. The RTX 3080 Ti clearly is power hungry. At 60 watts it doesn't have a chance. And now we go to the 3D Mark TimeSpy overall score, obviously combining the CPU and the GPU. And blimey, the Strix Scar SE does well. Moving on to games, Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440. We've got good performance in turbo and performance modes, and pretty decent in silent mode. Cyberpunk 2077 in 1080p. In turbo mode, the Strix Scar SE leaps ahead, still does well in performance mode. Silent mode, that's a reasonable game, and we can see there 60 FPS, just as the figures told us there'd be. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, 1440p, turbo mode, a huge 155 FPS. In performance mode, 123, silent mode, 78. 1080p, curiously, in turbo mode we leap forward to 170, in performance mode 123, silent mode 78, which is faster than I would have predicted. Far Cry 6 at 1440, the Strix Scar SE does very nicely, good gaming experience. At 1080p the Strix Scar SE does exactly the same as at 1440 in silent mode, but just look at the figures in turbo and performance mode, it's a beast. Watch Dogs Legion at 1440, the Strix Scar SE closes out the top of the chart. When we go to 1080p, it's a slightly different story. Surprisingly, the Strix Scar SE going well, but MSI suddenly jumps to the top of the chart. In our battery test, the Strix Scar SE did better than I expected. Big laptops can often do very poorly because they're so demanding of power. That figure is good. And so we come to the conclusion. What do I think of the Asus ROG Strix Scar 17SE bracket 2022 close bracket G733? I don't much like the model name. I think they could improve that. Please, someone at Asus, try saying out loud the models of your products. Put yourself in my shoes. Moving on from that trivial point, however, the pros and the cons. Pros, the good points. Huge performance. You've seen it in the charts. The processor in particular is just amazing. The Quad HD 240Hz display is impressive. I like it, it looks good. You may have noted I haven't put the KitGuru wallpaper on the laptop as I usually do. I've left up the Asus wallpaper because I think it looks really good. So there we have it. I'm voting, as it were, with more wallpaper. As a pro, I've put loads of RGB lighting, which clearly might be controversial, but I think it looks good. On the other hand, you're welcome to simply put that to one side and pretend it doesn't exist. The SSDs in RAID 0 run at blazing speed. They are just as fast as Hades. Mind you, I don't doubt we'll see similar performance when Gen 5 storage starts to hit the market, but at the moment this storage is just as fast can be. And also as a pro, the invisible ink pattern on the lid is fun. Clearly it's utterly irrelevant and you're only going to see it probably a handful of times in the time you might own this laptop, but there's no harm in fun. So let's give them a thumbs up and a pat on the back. Well done, whoever at Asus decided that was a thing to do. Cons, the negatives. The vents on the sides of the laptop, both sides, which act as exhaust vents, they get a bit toasty. So it doesn't really matter which side you have your mouse in hand, you've got hot air coming towards you. It's not the end of the world, but it is noticeable. You don't get a webcam. Asus has been doing this now for a few years, but given the whole pandemic thing, people using Skype and Zoom and Teams far more than they ever used to, a lack of webcam is just silly. We like thin bezels on displays, but webcams these days are essential. The ports and connectors on the back are awkward to reach. You've got very few ports on this side, none on that side other than the keystone gizmo. So that might be an issue for you. And finally, the laptop is large and fairly heavy. 3 kilos for the laptop, 1.1 for the power brick. That is inevitable with a large laptop that's as grunty as this. Nonetheless, at some point I have to carry the thing. Overall, I'm giving it 8 out of 10 and worth buying.